Hello, I'm Sylvie BILENT and I'm a PhD student at the Center of Nanoscience and Nanotechnology of Paris-Saclay University, and I'm pleased to present my work on the fabrication of porous polymer-based pressure sensors using sacrificial PVA 3D scaffolds for the refined tuning of sensors' performance. Flexible and wearable electronic devices for human health monitoring are considered as the next generation of personal electronic devices. Among them, human motion monitoring devices are needed in many medical applications such as gait and walk analysis. For example, in the context of chronic diseases such as diabetes or cardiovascular diseases. In this work, I will focus on flexible capacitive pressure sensors dedicated to the measurement of human body supports, such as plantar pressure supports. Here is the outline of my presentation. I will first introduce the principle of operation of flexible capacitive pressure sensors. Then, I will present the work I have been doing for the fabrication and the characterization of flexible scaffold PDMS layers, featuring controlled porosity to design such flexible pressure sensors. Then, I will jump to the electromechanical characterizations of sensors fabricated with such layers before concluding on my work. There are several methods to design flexible pressure sensors. Here, we will focus on capacitive pressure sensors. These sensors rely on the deformation of a flexible dielectric placed between electrodes, upper and lower, under the effect of normal or shear forces. These forces induce the displacement of the electrodes relatively to one another. The resulting variation of the capacitance is the image of the applied force. Typically, PDMS, polydimethylsiloxane, is a deformable dielectric polymer which is well suited to this type of application. However, it is hardly compressible in practice and therefore limits the sensitivity of the sensor. For that reason, some authors have developed structured PDMS layers by adding bumps on the top and air gaps within the layer in order to increase the sensor sensitivity. However, the sensor fabrication process is consequently more complex and sensors' performance become hardly predictable. A third option is to increase the deformability of the polymer layer by making it porous. And this is the track that we choose in this work in order to adjust the performance of the pressure sensors. Let us represent the performance of pressure sensors in terms of sensitivity expressed in percent of capacitance change per kilopascal and of measurement range expressed in kilopascal in this kind of performance chart. Bulk PDMS-based sensors found in the literature will be essentially located in this blue area, featuring low sensitivity and rather wide measurement range. Structured PDMS sensors are mostly located in this green area featured by a higher sensitivity but a lower measurement range. Early work using porous PDMS film has shown that it's possible to obtain a better trade-off between measurement range and sensitivity. That's why we choose to explore this path and try to optimize this performance. Previous work on the development of porous PDMS-based sensors were carried out in our lab. We used sacrificial sugar crystals mixed with PDMS during fabrication in order to insert millimetric pores to be inserted within the PDMS after dissolution of the sugar crystal. This work was presented during the DTIP 2019 conference. Fabricated sensors with such porous PDMS foams showed enhanced sensor sensitivity. However, this fabrication process only enabled high porosity PDMS foams to be produced, so the resulting sensors are not tunable in a wide performance range. This is why we turned to another porous PDMS layer technology, in which we introduced geometrically designed inner channels within the PDMS in order to easily control and adjust the porosity of the PDMS layer. You can see here some examples of such scaffold porous PDMS layers. I will move now to the presentation of the fabrication and of the characterization of such scaffold PDMS layers. The fabrication process is as follows. A sacrificial negative mold is firstly designed and fabricated using a commercial 3D filament printer. Here, the mold is fabricated in polyvinyl alcohol PVA. The 3D printed sacrificial mold is replicated into a polymeric structures of PDMS. To ensure complete filling of the microchannels with PDMS through capillary action, the sample was maintained in rest for an hour. PDMS is placed in a stove for 2 hours at 75 degrees Celsius. After curing, the whole structure, PVA mold and PDMS, is soaked in water bath to dissolve the PVA to obtain PDMS microchannels network architecture. The resulting scaffold PDMS layer is placed again in the stove for 2 hours at 75 degrees Celsius to remove the excess water. A 16 mm by 16 mm square shaped samples have been produced with various thicknesses and inner porosities. Here are some examples of PVA molds and resulting scaffold PDMS layers. You can see here some examples of 3 mm thick samples with various channel geometries, 1 mm high and 1 to 2 mm large channels, and 3D stacked arrangements. Yellow samples are PVA negative mold, and blue samples are resulting PDMS scaffolds. Other samples featuring the same kind of channel arrangements but with thicknesses of 4.5 mm and 6 mm were also fabricated. The porosity of these samples were estimated by design using the 3D geometry of the scaffold and the density of PDMS. The porosity was also experimentally estimated after fabrication. Here, you can see the estimated porosity for every channel arrangement as a function of the sample thickness. One can note that the expected porosity in blue and the obtained porosity in orange are very similar, less than 4% difference. Here, the chosen scaffold designs enable PDMS samples of around 30%, 50%, and 60% to be produced, with an easy and highly reliable porosity tuning method. Let us move to the electromechanical characterization of sensors fabricated with the designed PDMS scaffolds used as a deformable dielectric layers. To do this, we use an electromechanical characterization bench composed of a 3-axis robot which applies force to the pressure sensors under test. A commercial force sensor monitors the force actually applied through an indenter to the tested sample. The variation of the capacitance induced by the sensor compression is recorded through an impedance analyzer connected to the electrodes placed on each side of the PDMS scaffold. The capacitance change under stress is due to the reduction of the distance between electrodes as well as to the increase of the permittivity of the squeezed scaffold PDMS layer. Here is a typical electromechanical pressure sensor's response expressed in terms of capacitance change in percent versus applied load expressed in kilopascal. In order to extract sensor's performance from this type of nonlinear curve, we define the sensor sensitivity as being the slope of the tangent at the origin of the sensor response. The sensitivity is denoted S and is expressed in percent per kilopascal. Moreover, we define the pressure range of the sensors as being 3 times the value of the characteristic pressure denoted Pc. Pc is defined by the intersection of the slope at the origin of the curve and the maximum value of the variation of capacitance. The pressure range is denoted PR and is expressed in kilopascal. In order to easily extract these performance parameters from sensor experimental responses, we'll build up a behavioral model which is presented here. This model links the observed capacitance change delta C to the applied pressure P through the first-order exponential expression in which C0 is the load-free capacitance, delta C max is the maximum capacitance change, and Pc is the characteristic pressure. A numerical fitting between the model and the data allows delta C max and Pc to be assessed, and consequently the sensitivity S and the pressure range to PR to be estimated. Here are some examples of load and release characterization curves for sensors made with 3 mm thick PDMS layers, either bulk or scaffold. In this example, we can clearly see the influence of the porosity on the sensor's performance. Indeed, the sensitivity of the sensors significantly increases from 0% porosity in black to 60% porosity in green, while the pressure range decreases accordingly. Here, we compare the sensor response curves obtained under increasing loads for sensors made with the same scaffold geometry, providing 50% porosity, but with thicknesses of 3 mm represented by the blue curve, 4.5 mm represented by the red curve, and 6 mm represented by the green curve. We can clearly see that the thickness of the scaffold PDMS layers modifies the sensor performance. The sensitivity increases with the thickness and the pressure range decreases with the thickness. As a summary, we gather on these two histograms the evolutions of the sensor pressure range on the left-hand side and the sensitivity of the sensors on my right-hand side according to the porosity and thickness of the used scaffold PDMS layers. For the fabricated sample, the observed general tendency is that the pressure range decreases as porosity increases and the sensitivity increases as porosity increases. As conclusion, I will say that the use of scaffold PDMS layers to elaborated flexible pressure sensors allows easily tunable sensors performance to be reached by means of a simple fabrication process. Further work will focus on the fabrication of complete sensors featuring flexible electrodes, on the study of the robustness of each sensor to humidity, temperature, and fatigue, and on the design of anisotropic scaffold allowing free-access sensors to be elaborated. Thank you very much for your attention.